What is the worst thing that you have ever done in your entire life? Probably one of the most well-known parables of the New Testament is the story of the prodigal son. And it's a story that I think is so relevant to us today. You know, it's a story of a father who has two sons, and the youngest son, he comes to his father one day and he demands that he give him what is owed. He demands that his father gives to him an inheritance. And I think perhaps a lot of us, we look and we view the Christian life as a demand of what is owed to us. We've been going to church our whole lives. We've been participating in the sacraments. We've been doing all of this wonderful work. And we demand from God what is owed to us. And in the story of the prodigal son, what's really strange and what's really odd is that though the son so disrespectfully demands his inheritance from his father does something so strange and radical. His father gives it to him. He says, "Son, what's mine is yours. Here you go." And he hands him his inheritance, and his son, he takes it and he flees and he goes to a far off land. And it says in the parable in the New Testament, he says that he squandered his inheritance with dissolute living. And man, how often do we find ourselves in a place where we have squandered the inheritance that we have received from our Father in heaven? How often do we find ourselves in a place where we've received this gift of grace? We've received all that the Father has for us, and we have utterly failed to use it in a way that the Father desires of us. Maybe out of selfishness, out of pride, we've taken this beautiful and magnificent gift of grace. We've taken the Father's inheritance and we've squandered it in our lives. And I think just like in the story of the prodigal son, perhaps we find ourselves like the son who is now living in a severe famine. Farmed himself out to a local farmer who's feeding pigs in a field, and he's thinking to himself, man, I would gladly eat what these pigs are eating. And he started to think about what life was like back at home with his father in the kingdom, and he started thinking about how, man, I would gladly eat what these pigs are eating, and how many of my father's servants have bread enough to eat. And he started thinking about how he should make his way back home. And I think that's where a lot of us find ourselves, isn't it? Is we find ourselves living in a reality and in a circumstance where we just wonder, like, how did things get to where they are? How did we find ourselves so distant from our Father? How did we find ourselves in a place where we don't know how it is that we even made it there? And unlike the story of the prodigal son, I think far more often we don't abruptly leave our Father, but we find ourselves incrementally inching our way out of relationship with Him, growing the distance between us and our Father more and more each day. We find ourselves living in a circumstance that we just can't explain, and we know isn't right, and how we long to be reconciled with the Father in heaven. And just like in the story of the prodigal son, we start making our way back. We start journeying back towards the Father. And here's the beautiful part, is that when the Father sees his son far off, which means he was watching for him, he was looking for him, when he sees him, he starts running towards him. And he wraps his arms around him. And his son stops him. He says, "No, Father, I've sinned against you and against heaven. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son." And isn't that how we feel so often? When we find ourselves in the circumstance, when we find ourselves with a heart of malice, when we find ourselves full of resentment and pride and ego, and we look at our life and we know that it isn't right and we know that we want something more, we think of ourselves so unworthy of the Father's love. But his father, he looked at his son and he called for his servants and he says, "Come and put a ring on his finger and put sandals under his feet, put a robe around him, because this son of mine, he was lost and now he is found. He was dead and now he is alive." And that is the celebration that happens of mercy when the prodigal comes home. And that's what the Father longs for us. I think maybe we find ourselves so often that we haven't necessarily rejected God outright. There wasn't some moment in our life where we demanded something of him and then we walked away, but we found ourselves distant from him. Maybe out of laziness or complacency. Maybe we've lost the drive in our faith. Maybe we forgot really what the Christian life was all about. Maybe we find ourselves in a place where we just feel so unworthy of the Father's love for us. But here's the thing, is that he never stops pursuing us. That he never stops chasing after us because he wants to wrap his arms around us and say, "Child of mine, you were lost and now you're found. You were dead and now you are alive." And he wants to breathe life into our lives. That is the story of mercy and the love of God as he chases us, as he pursues us. Let's let him. Let's experience the Father's love wrapped around us. It's an embrace to experience and encounter his mercy in a profound and transformative way. The lie that we are told about returning home, about being the prodigal, see, we're told a lie that there is shame in returning home to the Father. That's the interesting part, isn't it? Is that there's no shame. As the Father recognizes us as a child, as the Father wraps his arms around us, that's when we actually experience and feel the Father's love. If you've been feeling distant from God, I want to just invite you to pray this song with me.
How many times I failed you? How many times I've needed to come back to you? And how many times you forgave me, opened your arms, embraced me. Here am I, my Lord. Pursue me with your heart. Consume surrender all. Pursue me with your heart. Consume me in your love. Pursue me with your heart. Consume me in your love. And I surrender, oh Jesus. I lay it down, I lay it down, I lay it all down at your feet. I lay it down, I lay it down, I lay it all down at your feet. I lay it down, I lay it down, I lay it all down at your feet. I lay it down, I lay it down, I lay it all down at your feet. Pursue me with your heart. Consume